A simple neighborhood game night was supposed to be nothing more than laughter, cards, and a way to chase away the silence that had filled my home. My husband, David, had been gone for almost a year, working on a long project in Dubai. His presence in my life had become more of a memory than a reality, and though I tried to stay strong, the loneliness had started to press against me in ways I could no longer ignore. I was 42, a woman who had always prided herself on loyalty and keeping her vows sacred. But that night, something shifted. The room was filled with the smell of barbecue and cedar, neighbors chatting around the table, glasses clinking. Then there was Ethan, the new 30-year-old who had recently moved in next door. He had this easy smile, a wit that made everyone laugh, and a charm that pulled me in before I realized what was happening. When he challenged me to a small bet during a round of cards, it seemed harmless. If I lost, I'd owe him a favor, something as silly as helping with his garden. I should have brushed it off, laughed along, and ended the night like nothing happened. But I didn't. As the game went on, his hand brushed mine, and instead of pulling away, I let the moment linger. His laughter broke through the heaviness I'd been carrying for months. For the first time in a long while, I felt seen. His questions weren't surface level. He wanted to know about me, my dreams, my struggles, the parts of myself I had quietly buried under the weight of David's absence. His attention felt like oxygen, like a lifeline I didn't know I needed until it was offered. When Ethan won the bet and asked for his favor, it wasn't anything wild. He simply wanted me to join him on his porch to talk more. I should have said no, but I followed him outside. The night was quiet, the air thick with something I couldn't name, and when his touch lingered on my arm, I didn't stop it. It wasn't lust, not at first. It was the aching need to feel alive, to feel important to someone again. That playful bet had opened a door I never thought I'd walk through. What felt like harmless connection began to unravel into something far deeper, a choice that gave me a sense of freedom in the moment but would cost me more than I could ever imagine. As the game night came to an end and the last guests walked out, silence filled the house. I stood in the living room, staring at the faint outline of the Austin skyline through the window, my heart pounding with the weight of what I had allowed. The laughter was gone, the cards were packed away, but inside me, something had shifted forever. How could something as harmless as a wager turn into the spark that unraveled my life? I already knew the answer. It wasn't the game, it was the loneliness, the longing, and the way Ethan had mirrored back the pieces of myself I'd been missing. One choice, one night, had set off a chain I couldn't stop. I kept asking myself the question no one wants to face. What do you do when a small connection feels like relief from unbearable loneliness? Do you resist and hold your ground, or do you give in like I did, blind to the cost until it's too late? This wasn't just about one betrayal. It was about how fragile fidelity can be, about how isolation can break you down, and how a single night has the power to reshape an entire life. Months later, I still feel the warmth of Ethan's touch and the strange comfort it gave me. It made me feel whole, even though it was the very thing that shattered everything. That night played out like a dream I never woke from, each moment pulling me deeper into choices I didn't fully understand. Even after Ethan left, his presence lingered in the house like smoke after a fire. His words replayed in my head, stirring emotions I had buried for years. I tried distracting myself, folding up the card table, checking my inbox, going through the motions, but none of it worked. The truth was clear. I had revealed a part of myself I had hidden for too long, even from myself. The game was over, but the mess was just beginning. I stood there in my quiet living room, knowing I had opened a door I wasn't ready to walk through, yet unable to close it. The real question wasn't just how I ended up here, but how I was going to face the fallout of a night that felt right in the moment but was painfully wrong. For anyone who's ever carried the weight of promises, for anyone who's felt the pull of temptation at the worst possible time, my story is a reminder of how fragile we really are. My name is Rachel Marie Sullivan, and at 42 years old, I thought I had control over my life. I grew up in a small town outside San Antonio, raised by a nurse and a high school coach who instilled in me the values of commitment and community. My childhood was warm and steady, helping my mom at the clinic, cheering at my dad's football games, organizing fundraisers for the animal shelter. I was the dependable one, the girl who never broke her promises, the one who organized the 4th of July picnic with precision. I studied communications at the University of Texas at Austin, chasing the dream of telling stories that connected people. That passion carried me into a career as a freelance writer, where I could create and still live with purpose. It was in Austin, at 29, that I met David. He was 46 then, an engineer who had already lived through heartbreak as a widower. With him, I felt safe, grounded, like the world finally made sense. I fell for David's steadiness, the way he made me feel like I was part of something lasting. 3 years after we met, we married and built a life together in a ranch-style home in Austin's Hyde Park. The house became our sanctuary, filled with my journals, his blueprints, and the memories of our early days. I poured myself into being the kind of wife who kept everything balanced, hosting neighborhood barbecues, planning weekend getaways to the hill country, creating a home where love and comfort could thrive. My career grew alongside our life. I wrote content for startups and nonprofits, carving out a space for myself that was both creative and purposeful. From the outside, it all looked perfect. But inside, there was a restlessness I couldn't quite name, a gnawing sense that something was missing. David's job kept him overseas for long stretches, sometimes months at a time, and while I managed at first, filling the days with writing, book clubs, and walks through the city, over the years the absences began to take a toll. As I entered my 40s, the silence in the house became harder to bear. What once felt like independence now felt like emptiness. Our home, which had once been alive with laughter and warmth, started to resemble a museum, a place where the past was displayed but the present felt hollow. I'd walk by photos of us, our wedding in Fredericksburg, our adventures in Sydney, quiet moments captured at home, and wonder when I had started feeling more like a shadow of myself than a whole person. I wasn't unhappy, but I was drifting, desperate for something to anchor me again. That's when Ethan appeared in my life. I met him at a block party not long after he moved into the neighborhood. He was 30, a graphic designer with a love for hiking, and his easy smile and quick wit made him stand out in a crowd. Where David was measured and thoughtful, Ethan was spontaneous and vibrant. He carried a warmth that felt disarming, the kind that lit up a room without effort. I began to notice the little things, the way he listened when I spoke, how his eyes shone when he shared his dreams of starting his own design studio. His presence wasn't something I sought out, but it became a quiet comfort, a spark against the dull routine of my evenings. He reminded me of the Rachel I used to be, the woman who dreamed boldly, who lived freely in her own skin. That's who I was on the night it all changed, a woman trying to find herself again, unaware that one neighbor's playful bet would alter everything. It was a warm October evening, 14 weeks into David's latest project in Dubai. My house buzzed with laughter, neighbors crowding around the table, glasses clinking, cards being dealt. I had organized the game night to push away the solitude that had been weighing me down. Earlier that morning I'd written to David, hoping for a longer conversation, something real. His reply had been short, a promise to call later. The call never came. By the time guests filled the living room, I was exhausted, not just from preparing the evening but from carrying the invisible weight of a marriage that felt like it was slipping through my fingers. And then there was Ethan, among the crowd, his laughter rising above the noise, his presence impossible to ignore. During a lively round of cards, he grinned and proposed a playful wager. If I lost, I'd owe him a small favor, something as harmless as helping with his garden. I laughed, caught up in the energy of the moment, and agreed. I had expected nothing more than a light-hearted game, a small distraction to lift the weight pressing on my chest. But when the cards fell against me and I lost, Ethan's grin carried something more than amusement. He leaned closer, suggesting we step outside to settle the favor. His tone was playful, but his eyes were serious, and before I knew it we were standing together on the porch, the sounds of laughter drifting faintly from inside. Out there in the quiet, away from the others, I found myself saying things I hadn't planned to share. I told him how hard David's long absences had become, how waiting had worn me down, how I sometimes felt I was fading into the background of my own life. Ethan didn't interrupt, didn't dismiss it. He just listened, his gaze steady, his silence patient, as if he understood the weight of every word. Then he said something simple but piercing. You're not just someone's wife, Rachel. You're you, and that's enough. His words hit me harder than I expected. For a moment I couldn't speak. Tears slipped out before I could stop them, proof of the ache I had carried too long. Ethan didn't hesitate. He stepped closer, his hand resting gently on my arm. It was a small gesture, but I leaned into it, letting the warmth of his touch calm the storm inside me. His presence felt grounding, and I allowed it to stay. We kept talking, our voices dropping lower, the conversation stretching longer than I ever intended. At one point I fumbled with my glass, and he reached out to steady my hand. His fingers lingered a moment too long, and I felt my breath catch. I could have pulled away. I could have walked back inside, thanked him for listening, and drawn the line where it belonged. But I didn't. Our eyes met, and in that look was a reflection of everything I was afraid to admit, my vulnerability, my hunger to feel whole again. I let the moment stretch. I let his touch remain when I should have ended it. He spoke softly about seizing the moments that matter, about finding connections that remind us we're alive, and I clung to those words like they were the answer I had been waiting for. It wasn't about attraction, not in the way people assume. It was about need, my need to be seen, to matter, to feel alive again. Ethan's attention gave me that, and for the first time in years, I felt like more than the sum of my roles. That night, on that quiet porch, I let him stay too close. I let our conversation wander too deep. I let his touch become something more than neighborly. It wasn't dramatic or scandalous. It was quiet, it was subtle, but it was betrayal all the same. When we stepped back inside that night, the weight of what I had done pressed down on me like a stone. It wasn't just that I had crossed a line with David, I had crossed one with myself. There was no undoing it. The next morning the house felt different, the air still carrying the echo of Ethan's presence. He had left with the others, his goodbye casual and light, but the memory of his touch clung to me like a shadow in every corner of the room. I tried to convince myself it was nothing, a slip, a fleeting moment that meant more to me than it ever should have. But the guilt was alive inside me, whispering in my chest that I had betrayed not only David but also the life we had carefully built together. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan smile, felt the warmth of his hand on my arm. And shame mixed with something else, something dangerous, that I couldn't name. A few days later I spotted him mowing his lawn. He waved as though nothing had changed, his grin easy, but his eyes carried a question, a tension that told me the moment haunted him, too. I waved back from across the street but kept my distance, clinging to routine, though the air between us felt too charged for small talk. Every encounter after that, a nod at the mailbox, a polite conversation about a neighborhood event, was laced with an undercurrent we both pretended not to feel. That weekend David called. His voice was warm, alive with news about his project, and I forced myself to match his excitement. I laughed, I asked questions, I smiled as though nothing was wrong, but my mind was elsewhere. A part of me longed to confess, to spill everything into the safety of his voice, but how could I? What words could I possibly use? That I had let a neighbor slip past my guard. That one moment of weakness had redefined me in ways I didn't understand. The words never left my lips. I swallowed them down, burying them beneath shame and fear. I told myself it was a mistake I could bury, that I could move on and return to being the wife David deserved. But life doesn't always let mistakes stay hidden. A week later Ethan showed up at my door. He spoke about needing help with a design project for his garden, insisting it was the favor I owed from our bet. I hesitated, my chest tight, but agreed, telling myself it was harmless. Just neighborly. But as we worked, his words shifted. He admitted that he couldn't stop thinking about that night, about the things we had shared in the quiet of the porch. His tone was gentle, but his meaning was clear, he felt something too. My heart sank. Until then I thought the weight was mine alone, that what happened lived only in my guilt. But hearing Ethan admit his feelings forced me to face the truth, it wasn't just a moment anymore. It had become something neither of us could fully ignore. I tried to shut it down, told him it was a mistake, that it had to end there. But my words wavered, betraying the part of me that still felt the pull. Not long after, my phone buzzed. It was Lisa, a friend from down the street. She asked if I was okay, then added casually that she had seen Ethan and me talking on my porch. "You two looked close," she wrote, her message framed as concern but carrying a warning. My stomach dropped. Whispers were starting, small enough now, but dangerous if they grew. Rumors have a way of traveling faster than truth, and I knew if they ever reached David, the damage would be irreversible. Panic set in. I hadn't realized how visible my weakness had been, how easily the appearance of closeness could be twisted into something bigger than it was. I deleted Lisa's message, but the fear didn't leave with it. It lingered, heavy and suffocating, a reminder that the cost of that one night was already catching up to me. I confronted Ethan, telling him that people were beginning to talk and that we had to be careful. Instead of stepping back, he leaned in closer to the truth, suggesting we meet for coffee to talk things through, to make sense of what was happening between us. I wanted to refuse, to draw a hard line, but something inside me couldn't let go. Each exchange with him seemed to pull me deeper into a tangle of guilt, desire, and fear that I couldn't escape. I felt split in two, between my love for David, the man I'd built my life with, and the undeniable connection I shared with Ethan. It wasn't about physical attraction alone, it was the way he looked at me, the way he seemed to notice parts of me that had been invisible for so long. But inside, I was falling apart. Each time I looked in the mirror, I saw a stranger, a woman who had betrayed her husband, her values, and even herself. I tried to make things right, planning little gestures for when David returned, hoping romance would patch the cracks. But the distance between us felt like an endless stretch of silence, and Ethan's presence across the street reminded me of everything I was trying to bury. That night hadn't been a fleeting mistake. It was a fracture that had spread into every corner of my life. The breaking point came on a cold November evening, nearly 3 months after that night. David was due home in a week, and I had spent those months trying to rebuild the walls I had carelessly let fall. I kept Ethan at arm's length, avoided long conversations, and tried to convince myself I was moving forward. But he was still there, just across the street, a constant reminder of the choice I couldn't undo. Then Lisa, my friend and neighbor, came to see me. Her face carried a heavy seriousness as she explained that the whispers around the neighborhood were growing louder. People had noticed the way Ethan and I lingered on the porch, the closeness of our conversations, and from that, a story was being told. Lisa wasn't accusing me, but her words carried a warning, for me, for David, for everything I stood to lose. After she left, my world felt unsteady, as if the ground itself had shifted. That night, I found myself walking to Ethan's house, determined to end it before the rumors destroyed everything. I found him in his living room, working on sketches, his calm presence both comforting and dangerous. I told him about the gossip, how our single moment of weakness had grown into something far more visible than we realized, and that it had to stop. But Ethan didn't flinch. He set his pencil aside, met my eyes, and said he wasn't sorry. He admitted he felt something for me, something real, and he asked me to do the one thing I'd been avoiding all along, be honest about what I was truly feeling. His words that night cut through me like a blade. I stood frozen, heart pounding, with every emotion I had tried to bury rushing back all at once. I was furious, at Ethan for pushing, at myself for letting it go this far, and even at David for being gone so long that I had let the emptiness swallow me. Fear tangled with my anger. Fear of losing my marriage, of ruining my reputation, of not knowing who I really was anymore. And underneath it all, a small part of me still clung to that connection with Ethan, the way he made me feel seen in a way I hadn't in years. It wasn't love, not in the way he wanted, but it was powerful enough to leave me torn in half. In that moment, I had no choice but to decide. I told Ethan it was over. I told him I was choosing David, choosing my marriage, choosing the life I had built. His face fell, but he nodded, promising to step back. Walking away should have felt like freedom, but instead it felt like tearing something vital from myself. Not because I wanted him, but because I was letting go of the part of me that had briefly felt alive again. The next day, Ethan kept his distance, and I was left alone with my guilt, my fear, and the heavy reality that David would be home soon. I had chosen my marriage, but I couldn't shake the feeling that it might not be enough. The rumors were still alive, whispers that spread through the neighborhood, and I was carrying a secret that pressed harder on my chest with every passing day. When David finally returned, he came through the door with tired eyes and arms full of gifts. I kissed him, smiled for him, but inside I was trembling. Across the street, Ethan remained silent, and though his absence was a relief, the truth of what had happened lingered like a shadow I couldn't escape. I tried to explain away my unease to David, blaming work, blaming stress, blaming anything but the real reason. He accepted it, or at least pretended to, and we tried to slip back into the comfort of our old routines. But I knew nothing was the same anymore. The whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, shared in coffee shops, in book clubs, at small gatherings where neighbors traded looks they thought I didn't see. Each glance reminded me of my mistake, each laugh carried an edge that cut into my conscience. I tried to bury myself in my marriage, to focus on David, but guilt became my shadow. At night, I lay awake replaying every moment with Ethan, wondering how I had let myself step so far over the line, wondering if I had lost the version of myself I once believed I was. I wanted to confess, to let it all spill out, but the words never came. Not because I didn't fear losing David, I did, but because saying it out loud would mean admitting I had been that weak, that careless, that human. Months passed, and the weight between us only grew heavier. David noticed my hesitation, the way I pulled away from his touch, the way I dodged certain conversations. He tried to close the distance, suggesting dinners, trips, little moments to reignite what we once had, but I couldn't meet him halfway. I was there, but not fully. I was his wife in name, but inside I was still that fractured woman standing in Ethan's living room, caught between the person I wanted to be and the mistake I couldn't erase. The papers came in the mail, crisp and cold, like a final verdict I couldn't appeal. I signed them with trembling hands, every stroke of the pen cutting deeper into the life I once believed unshakable. Friends pulled away, some quietly, some abruptly, as though my mistake might stain them too. The house felt emptier than ever, filled with echoes of laughter and love that no longer belonged to me. I replayed it all, Ethan's words, David's silence, the whispers that had grown into storms. And I realized the betrayal wasn't just what I'd done to David, but what I'd done to myself. I had traded honesty for comfort, integrity for a fleeting sense of being seen. And in the end, I had lost both the man I loved and the woman I thought I was. Healing didn't come quickly. It came in fragments, long walks where I let the tears fall freely, late nights spent journaling, mornings where I forced myself out of bed even when grief pressed me down. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild. Not my marriage, not the image others held of me, but myself. And while I'll always carry the weight of that night on the porch, I've learned something crucial. Sometimes one mistake doesn't just cost you a relationship, it forces you to face the person you've become. And if you're brave enough, it can also force you to grow. A broken marriage, a fractured community, and a life I no longer recognized pushed me into a small apartment in East Austin, where I started therapy and began the slow, painful work of rebuilding. I came to understand it was never just about that night with Ethan, it was about the years of loneliness, the unmet needs, and the quiet erosion of my identity. The truth was harsh but simple, you can't outrun your choices. That moment I shared with him, though it felt vital at the time, was a betrayal not only of David but of myself. I had allowed loneliness to shape me, to push me into something that seemed right in the moment but was so deeply wrong. Yet, sitting in that quiet apartment, I found a strange kind of gratitude. Not for the betrayal, but for the clarity it forced upon me. It made me face myself, to strip away the roles and expectations, to begin again from the ground up. The cost was everything, my marriage, my community, the image I once held of myself, but the lesson was mine to keep. What does it mean to betray someone you love, not out of malice, but through a moment of human frailty? My story isn't about scandal or recklessness. It's about the subtle ways we betray ourselves when we ignore our own needs. The moral is layered, because life is layered. It isn't only about keeping promises, though that matters deeply. It's about remembering that your first promise is to yourself, to honor your truth, to speak your needs, to guard against the silence that makes you seek salvation in places you never should. I learned that loneliness is powerful. It can blur your vision, make you mistake comfort for connection, and lead you down paths that leave permanent marks. I wasn't a villain, nor was I a victim. I was simply a woman who made a choice, and that choice carried consequences far beyond that single night. Every decision matters, each conversation, each touch, each moment of vulnerability. They all hold weight when they spring from neglect and unmet needs. Trust, once broken, is fragile. Not just trust with others, but with yourself. I had spent so much of my life defining myself as David's wife, as the woman who kept everything together. When that identity collapsed, I was forced to ask the hardest question, who am I when no one is watching? The answer was painful, but it was also liberating. I had to rebuild my sense of self, not as a wife, not as someone else's anchor, but as Rachel. A flawed woman with needs, with mistakes, and with a heart still capable of healing despite the scars. To anyone listening, my story is a call to look inward before it's too late. Don't wait for loneliness to consume you. Speak your truth to your partner, to your friends, and most importantly, to yourself. Don't let the quiet erosion of discontent grow into a void that swallows you whole. And when you stumble, and you will, own it. Not with shame, but with courage. Let it teach you. Let it grow you. My life was shattered, but in pieces, I found the chance to rebuild. I am not the woman I was before that night, but I am still here, still learning, still fighting to be better. The lesson isn't about avoiding mistakes. It's about what you choose to do with them. Do you let them define you, or do you let them shape you into someone stronger? I chose the latter. Though the price I paid was steep, I am slowly learning to live with the woman I've become. My story is a caution, yes, but also a reminder, that even in the ruins, there is a chance to rise again. You are never as alone as you feel, and no matter how broken life seems, you are always just one choice away from a different path. Every decision carries weight, so choose carefully. But even when you stumble, keep moving forward. What would you do if a single moment of connection threatened to unravel everything you had built? Have you ever faced a decision that changed the course of your life in an instant? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And if this journey of love, betrayal, and self-discovery touched you, don't forget to subscribe for more raw and honest stories about the truths we all live through. Until next time, take care and see you in the next story. Please always subscribe to this channel for more stories. Your support means the world, and it helps us keep bringing you raw, heartfelt tales of love, betrayal, and redemption.